Peace and blessings, dear FBA family and friends. I am your brother and host, Dr. Muhammad, and these are the Dr. Muhammad Files. Welcome, and today we're going to take a deep dive into exploring the concept of ethnomelanism and the ongoing ethnocide against foundational Black American descendants of freedmen through institutional policies such as DEI and cultural erasure of foundational Black Americans and strategies and solutions for resistance. So, ethnic erasure or ethnomelanism is a term I coined in my dissertation entitled Experiences of Foundational Black American Male Faculty Exploring Anti-Black Racism at Predominantly White Institutions of Higher Learning. The term ethnomelanism, which effectively merges ethnocide and anti-Black racism, reflects the systemic discrimination and erasure of Black ethnic identities and cultures due to anti-Black racism and acts of ethnocide, specifically toward Black American freedmen or foundational Black American, depending upon which context determine which one we use. I will discuss the meaning of Black American freedmen and foundational Black Americans and when we use it, hopefully in our discussion today. So the melanin element of ethnomelanism alludes to the skin pigment shared by Black individuals, adding depth to the term's representation. Therefore, it is crucial to delineate between groups with similar phenotypical characteristics and features to understand and embrace their distinct experiences. Well, people may ask, well, why does it matter what we call ourselves? Or the new one is, you're being divisive. And when you ask things like, well, how many tribes are in Africa? They say hundreds. So it's not divisive then, but it's only divisive when Black Americans or foundational Black Americans say, hey, we're going to delineate, and this is what we want people to recognize us as. I aver there has been a deliberate erasure or ethnomelanism effort by those in the dominant society, using some people in our community willing to sell us out for a few butter biscuits to distance our people from this land, the land our ancestors built with free blood, sweat, and their lives. They've done this, they being the dominant society, by attempting to erase our history that ties us to the creation of this land. They have told us to look to a distant place, Africa, where many of our lineages do not come from. So lineage not to be confused with ancestry, because if ancestry is the marker we are using, everyone is from Africa, including Elon Musk. So technically, he's African American. They've tried to erase our history and connection to this land by using terms such as people of color or minorities. I assert this is all part of the dominant society's attempt to erase foundational Black Americans or FBAs and our history and superimpose other immigrant groups, cultures like African Caribbean culture on our unique FBA culture. In fact, we being foundational Black Americans are the only non-immigrants to this land. We did not immigrate to this land. Some of our people were here prior to Christopher Columbus and mixed with Europeans, the red natives, the Black Aboriginal natives, and Africans who were kidnapped and brought here, creating an ethnogenesis. We are no longer just the Black Aboriginals that were here, nor just the Africans that were kidnapped and brought here. We are a new people because of ethnogenesis. We are foundational Black Americans or Black American freedmen. Institutions like higher education have used initiatives like diversity, equity, inclusion, affirmative action to elevate those who look like FBAs, for example, African and Caribbeans, who are actively attempting to undermine foundational Black Americans. Some, not all, are actively attempting to undermine foundational Black Americans and their advancement. Institutions are able to do this by using terms like people of color, minorities, and putting these people in positions like DEI officer or DEI coordinator. For example, one of the participants in my study, we called Malcolm, a pseudonym, said that an example of how white supremacy operates is seen in the president's decision, this is at the university, to hire a diversity, equity, and inclusion representative who would be, listen to this, obedient. He said he hired a colleague of mine, a former Singaporean military official with a PhD, whose research had nothing to do with DEI issues. Despite lacking the credibility in that role, he was appointed as the chief equity officer at the university. This individual then went on to hire people of color, but none were FBA faculty, only Africans or islanders. Here's the kicker. He said many of whom were openly opposed to DEI initiatives. Interestingly enough, Malcolm also spoke about how other melanated immigrants would openly discuss foundational Black Americans using derogatory terms. He commented, many African immigrants and immigrants from the islands are preferred over FBA faculty during recruitment, yet they may also engage in anti-Black racism against FBAs. In other words, someone can be a victim of anti-Black racism and still perpetuate it. For instance, Somalis, Egyptians, Ethiopians, and even West Africans, they have derogatory terms they use for Black Americans. Somalis, for example, use the term Madu, which they claim simply means black. But if that were true, why don't they use it to refer to themselves? Because the term carries a pejorative negative connotation. I also noted in my dissertation other derogatory terms that immigrant groups use against FBAs like Akata, Jarir, Abid, Madu, Mayat, Abruni, Lost. All of this is why it matters what we call ourselves, how we delineate. Now, who are foundational Black Americans and when do we use this term as opposed to Black American freedmen? It's real simple. So in my dissertation in the literature review chapter, I have an entire section called Who are Foundational Black Americans? In addition, when I initially conducted my research, there was not one article using the word FBA. I've recently found one and heard of another. This shows the term is taking hold and starting to be used more in academia and mainstream. In fact, I heard Ann Coulter use the term in an interview on C-SPAN. So in the one article that specifically cited the term FBA, according to Abdullah 2024 in his piece entitled Providing Equity, the Importance of Separate Educational Spaces and Foundational Black American Male Teachers for Foundational Black American Males, grades 6 through 12. The term Foundational Black American has emerged in the past 3 years. It was coined to clarify the concept of Native Blacks, a term introduced by our dear elder Dr. Claude Anderson in the 1980s. So to avoid confusion with the indigenous natives of North America, Tariq Nasheed emphasized the word foundational in the new term, according to the official FBA website. So foundational Black Americans are simply the descendants of the Black individuals who built the United States from its inception. In my dissertation, I also noted the first appearance of the term African American, which traces back to 1782 in a sermon published in Philadelphia, ironically enough, written by a person calling themselves an African American. After that, you didn't see the term used up until the late 1980s. The term African American was endorsed and popularized in the late 1980s by 5 people, including Reverend Jesse Jackson and Ramona Edelin, leading the charge. At the time, listen to this, FBA family. At the time, the term African American was rejected by 75% of Black Americans, but was adopted at a conference called, you guessed it, the African American Summit, without the input of most Black Americans. We woke up one day and we were just calling ourselves African American. I remember this back in the late 1980s. I'm going, wait, we're what? Who said that? So the delineation of Black Americans or foundational Black Americans has increased because of recent mass immigration from Africa and Caribbean countries. Black American freedmen are non-immigrant Americans with a unique and distinguished history on American soil. Why do I say we are non-immigrants? Simply put, FBA did not immigrate to the United States, but rather built it. There was no United States before FBA built it with their free labor. I assert we start to self-identify as FBA for race and lineage, and then for legal matters as Black American freedmen to acknowledge our ethnic group. The term African American is not appropriate for Black American freedmen, as it can also apply to individuals who voluntarily migrate from Africa, such as Nigerian Americans. Establishing Black American freedmen as a distinct category will ensure that our culture and history are clearly recognized and not confused with other identities. To show our connection to this land, there's a book entitled How Blacks Built America: Labor, Culture, Freedom, and Democracy by Dr. Fegan. It highlights the significant and impactful contributions made by FBAs throughout the nation's history. Dr. Fegan accentuated Black labor built the economy. Black genius shaped the culture in the U.S. Black action accelerated freedom, justice, and democracy during the 1700s and 1800s. This is really true. One of the biggest misconceptions or revision of history is that FBA's free labor only affected the South or only built up the South. This is not only far from the truth, but it's also disinformation. In fact, I assert, free FBA labor enriched the world. In his chapter, Black Labor Building the Economy, for example, enslaved blacks provided an immense and essentially free workforce that powered the agricultural economy, particularly in cotton, tobacco, and sugar production. The profitability of these crops fueled global trade networks. American cotton, for example, became a crucial commodity for the textile industry in Europe and New England, driving industrialization and economic growth in those regions. The profits from this trade contributed directly to the accumulation of wealth in Europe and elsewhere. In his chapter, Black Genius Shaping the U.S. Culture, in many respects, he says American culture practices are from FBA culture practices, even if their origins are often forgotten. African American, Dr. Feaser, he uses the term the African American, which is a misnomer. Influence permeates not only music, literature, religion, and sports, but also significant technological advances and the evolution of U.S. English, especially slang. I remember when we first started using the word "what's up," the dominant society lost its mind. They would make mockery of the term. And now, guess what? It's in the American English lexicon. So it goes to show you we are the culture. FBA are the culture. In his chapter, Black Action Accelerating Freedom, Justice, and Democracy, 1700s and 1800s, Contrary to his story, FBAs have always fought injustice here in America. We were not docile Negroes, as his story would suggest. As Fegan suggested in chapter 5 of his book, this racist narrative has persisted for centuries, he says. In reality, most enslaved individuals were not content and actively sought their freedom whenever possible. Many people openly rebelled, such as our great warrior Nat Turner and the Maroons in the Dismal Swamp, while others took more covert actions. I contend FBA pushed America to a more true constitutional democracy, not just on paper. We still have a way to go, but we were the ones pushing for a true quote unquote democracy. In the great words of our FBA brother James Baldwin, I love my country. This is why I criticize her. So we know the issue, right? We know what the issues are. But here are some strategies based on the concepts of ethnomelaninism and the fight against the erasure of foundational Black Americans. Strategy 1, or point 1, is the delineation process. It's crucial, family, that and friends, it's crucial that we highlight the unique identity of foundational Black Americans, making a clear distinction from Black immigrant groups not to denigrate other melanated people. That's not the purpose. It's to preserve our distinct history and culture. Part of that is encouraging FBAs to self-identify, whether as foundational Black Americans or Black American freedmen, so that our lineage is recognized in both legal and social spaces. This is about owning our narrative and ensuring our history isn't erased or diluted. Point 2 is the politics aspect. We need to support and uplift political candidates who come from foundational Black American background, leaders who truly fight for FBA specific issues like lineage-based reparations and other forms of reparative justice. At the same time, we're pushing for policies. We should be pushing for policies that directly address the unique challenges FBA face, from economic disparities to systemic racism. It's about making sure our voices are represented at every level of government. Point number 3 is in the educational field, which I am part of. We should work on building educational programs that shine a light on the rich history and contributions of FBAs, weaving our stories into school curricula and even launching specialized courses at universities. Plus, we should roll out public awareness campaigns to spread the word about ethnomelaninism and tackle the erasure of FBA identities, family, making sure everyone understands both our history and the ongoing challenges. Point number 4 of cultural preservation. We should create cultural programs and events that celebrate specifically the heritage of foundational Black Americans on this land, not some far distant African land that most of us, I've been there, but most of us have not been to Africa and have no connection to Africa. We should be doing this through music, literature, and art to keep our culture alive and thriving. At the same time, we should push for stronger media representation, ensuring that foundational Black American stories and perspectives are seen and heard from our perspective. Because it's all about preserving our legacy and countering the cultural erasure that has tried to silence us for far too long. For example, they're now trying to erase us from hip hop and say that white Latinos invented hip hop. This is insane. Point number 5, legal and institutional reforms. We should take a hard look at diversity, equity, and inclusion policies to make sure they're not unintentionally sidelining foundational Black Americans in favor of other melanated immigrants, or even if we should advocate for these programs? What benefit are we getting out of DEI? I know personally, I have not gotten to where I am because of DEI. True equity means ensuring FBA advancement isn't overlooked. We should also hold institutions accountable for policies and practices that erase FBA identities, whether it's in hiring, promotion, or leadership opportunity. FBA family, it's time to make sure our voices are heard and our contributions recognized at every level. Point number 6 is community building. We should build strong support networks for foundational Black Americans, from mentorship programs to professional development and community organization. It's about creating spaces where we, FBA, can uplift and empower each other. At the same time, we should foster grassroots movement to give FBA communities a real voice, making sure we're advocating for our rights and interests, not just locally, family, but on state and national levels too. This is about taking action and securing our future. Point number 7, last and most importantly, we should fight for lineage-based reparations, specifically for foundational Black Americans, acknowledging our unique history, contributions, and the injustices we've endured. This means pushing for real restitution and compensation for the economic and cultural losses caused by slavery, systemic racism, and ethnocide or ethnomelaninism. It's about justice, accountability, and making sure FBA descendants of slavery get what they are rightfully owed. Not some handout, but what our lineage is owed. So, dear FBA family, by implementing these strategies and first understanding and acknowledging our distinct lineage, once we understand the unique lineage that we have, we can implement these strategies. FBA can resist cultural erasure and ensure that our history and contributions are recognized and valued. So, in conclusion, FBA family and friends, while immigrants or children of immigrants in America may identify as Black or African American due to their racial identity or voluntary migration from Africa, this does not fairly represent those without an immigrant lineage, foundational Black Americans. For instance, a Jamaican child born in America to Jamaican parents should not be recognized as Black American freedmen. Their immigrant background should not be conflated with the non-immigrant heritage of Black American freedmen. Given the freedmen history in this nation and the historical significance of the federal status of freedmen, it's only logical for Black American freedmen to be recognized by their unique identity, both historically and presently. This recognition should be distinct from other racial or ethnic groups so that foundational Black Americans may preserve our history, culture, and identity here in the United States of America that we built. So, thank you for joining. If you like it, share it, comment below. Signing off, your brother and host, Dr. Muhammad, and these are the Dr. Muhammad Files.